But we all know the Freemasons are a classic secret society and a huge part of the conspiracy world, although opinions on the group are very divided. Some consider them to be secret crusaders protecting Gnostic and occult information from those like the Vatican and other ruthless power groups who seek its destruction due to the enlightening and self-empowering nature. Others see this group as architects and puppet masters of governments and societies for decades, with a structure that pulls a bait-and-switch on God for satanic worship at the highest levels, coercing its members into orgiastic blood sacrifice in the name of ultimate power and control. Well, wherever your opinions lie, my good friend Kyle and I are here with Robert Sullivan, researcher and author of the Royal Arch of Enoch, the Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy, and Symbolism, and he's going to give us his take on the whole thing. Rob has also worked his way to a respectable 32nd degree Mason, just waiting on the invite for the big 33. Rob, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, hey, Craig, and hello, Kyle, and it's wonderful to be here with you on HighersideChats, and it's wonderful to be here with you today.
It's a pleasure to have you, man. I mean, you're very detailed in your knowledge of Freemasons and the history, the philosophy, the culture, and as I just said in the intro, there's a lot of controversy with the Masons, a lot of passionate opinions. So if you could, would you mind starting us off a bit with the history of the Masons and their influence?
Sure. Yeah, you are correct. You will encounter, all sides, all angles on this material. Some people, I am one, of course. I've been a Blue Lodge Freemason since 1997. And of course, I joined the Scottish Rite and became a 32nd degree in 1999. But you are correct. You'll hear all kind of information on this group. The history of the Freemasons, the actual formation, I'm going to try to just give you a concise history in a brief amount of time. But believe me, I'm going to be skimming over a lot of material. So I mean, I want you and your audience to be aware of this. In a nutshell. Freemasonry comes together as it is today as a modern, fraternal order secret society on June 24th, 1717, where you have these four lodges in England that combine and ultimately create this Grand Lodge of England. And interestingly, you were talking about the keepers of occult knowledge and Gnosticism. I mean, that date does have importance. This is, of course, a clear reference to the summer solstice when the sun is at its penultimate peak in the sky in the northern hemisphere. This would be, in Hebrew Kabbalah, where Apollo is driving his sun chariot, across the sky at his ultimate strength. And of course, I delve into the Royal Arch, and of course, the sun is the most important symbol in Freemasonry. Just right off the top, you've got the worshipful master, who's the guy who runs the Masonic Lodge. He sits in the east, representing the rising sun, which brings light, wisdom, knowledge to the world, as it were. But the group forms in 1717, and that's really your modern day birth of what you would call Freemasonry as it exists today. Now, some will tell you, and this gets into who you want to believe and who you want to listen to, that Freemasonry, of course, predates this. Shortly after its formation, a Presbyterian minister named Dr. James Anderson writes this thing called the Legendary Constitutions of Freemasonry. The full title is The Constitutions, plural, of Freemasonry, or of the Freemasons. I've seen it both ways. And he documents this legendary history of the Masons, and I stress that word, legendary. He gets into that these guys were the, temple builders from the Bible, building things like the Tower of Babel, that, Adam's fig leaf in the garden was really a Masonic apron, things like, the medieval, Germanic, Teutonic, European cathedral builders possessed these, occult secrets of sacred geometry, things of that nature. His constitutions, really, and it also contains like bylaws. Actually, in some cases, some versions of it actually contain songs about the Masons. I mean, that's really the basic bylaw of Freemasonry. This gets sort of turned on its head in 1737 when an Englishman named Andrew Michael Ramsay, who's living in France at the time. He's one of the co-founders of the Royal Society. He's a Roman Catholic, but he's also a universalist. And just if you don't know what that is, or if basically it's a religious belief where universalism is that at the end days and eventually all evil will be redeemed by God and even Satan himself. And it's in a nutshell that even, all the devils and Satan and hell and all the bad people will ultimately be granted entrance into heaven because God is just sick of their suffering. It's called universalism. And Ramsay, he also serves as the tutor of a guy by the name of what's his name? Charles Edward Stuart, who is Bonnie Prince Charlie. But at any rate, Ramsay writes this oration in 1737 to the Freemasonic lodges, and he says, essentially, I kind of don't really disagree with what Anderson is saying there about, Freemasons having these secrets of stoneworking, of cathedral building, of sacred architecture, of sacred geometry, of secret symbolisms. He said, I really don't disagree with that so much. He said, but that's really not the true history of Freemasonry. He said the true history of Freemasonry lies in this group of warrior Roman Catholic medieval monks called the Knights Templar, and that Freemasonry is pure Roman Catholicism. And he says that when the Templars were in the Holy Land crusading, that they encountered these sort of vestiges of these ancient mystery schools. This would, of course, been the ancient mysteries of things like Osiris, Isis, these leftover mystery schools from the Mediterranean, of things of like, the mysteries of Eleusis, where you have, the adoration of Demeter, Minerva. You have elements of Pythagoras being incorporated into this, philosophies related to Zoroastrianism, of Mithraism, and that essentially, while the knights were over there, they midwifed these secrets back to Europe, and as part of this mystery tradition was these Kabbalistic numerological secrets that these medieval stonemasons were using and incorporating into the creation of these medieval, Gothic cathedrals and so on. And out of Ramsay's oration is what is born what is called the right of perfection, and this comes out in the 1740s, 1750s. This right of perfection is these additional 25 degrees, which I say in my book, and we're getting into controversial subject matter here, but I don't mind it.
We don't either.
Yeah, no, it's clear that these 25 degrees are being developed by this group known as the Society of Jesus, better known to the world as the Jesuits, as part of the Counter-Reformation in an effort to basically thwart the Protestant Masonic lodges, which were basically deism. If you're not aware of that, there is no religious requirement to join a Masonic lodge. You could be Christian, you can be Jewish, you could be, a Muslim, you could be Hindu, you could be Buddhist. The only requirement is that you believe in what's called a supreme being, a godlike entity. You will hear the term the great architect of the universe thrown around. That's what he's referred to in Masonry. But these 25 degrees, this right of perfection is clearly being developed as sort of this counter-Reformation trick by the Jesuits to sort of lure, Freemasonry or Freemasons secretly back to the Pope in Rome. The 25 degrees are ultimately midwifed through Haiti by a man named Etienne Morin, and these 25 degrees are set up in a right of perfection lodge in Albany, New York, and these are ultimately what become the York Rite of Freemasonry and the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. And what my book documents is this major historical anomaly going on because it's one of these degrees, namely the 13th, which is entitled the Royal Arch, which is incorporating elements of the Book of Enoch, which is this lost apocryphal Jewish text, which is essentially off the history pages from 2 CE or 2 AD to around the early 1770s when a man named James Bruce returns with copies from Ethiopia. Up until then, they were lost to Western civilization, and the copies are deposited in the basement of the Bodleian Library at Oxford University and aren't even translated into English until 1821. Yet in the 1740s, 1750s, clearly someone had access to a copy of this book, and I believe this book is some sort of long-lost book floating around some secret library in Europe that certain elements and components of this book are clearly being incorporated into this higher degree, and that's really the crux of what the Royal Arch of Enoch presents.
Man, that's a pretty good summary of the history. Well, you yourself a 32nd degree Mason, which I understand is the highest order one can work towards. Then after that, you have to be chosen from the top. Is that right?
Well, there are two. When you get into what and this ties into your first question. What you have to do is you have to join what's called the Blue Lodge, and the Blue Lodge of Freemasonry is degrees 1, 2, and 3. This is what's called Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason. Once a person becomes a Master Mason degree, there are really two premier higher degree bodies they can go into, or they could go into both. There's no prohibition against joining either of them. But I'll tell you why the Scottish Rite is a little more popular than the York Rite in a minute. You can do what's called the York Rite or the Scottish Rite. I chose the Scottish Rite, and you're correct. The Scottish Rite is degrees 4 through 32, and the 33rd degree is honorary. It cannot be solicited. You have to be invited by the Mother Supreme Council to join the 33rd degree. The York Rite, and this isn't meant to be negative or anything like that, so if it's coming off that way, that's not my intention. A reason the Scottish Rite is probably a little bit more popular than the York Rite is the York Rite degrees, and these are again coming out of these 25 degrees that were set up in Albany, New York by a Freemason named Henry Franken. The two men who are behind the York Rite of Freemasonry was a Masonic ritualist named Thomas Smith Webb, which no one's ever heard of before, and another person who no one ever has heard of before, but maybe some have, a man by the name of DeWitt Clinton. And DeWitt Clinton is a very important person in American history. He was a mayor of New York City and a former governor of New York State. And it's those two men who are really cultivating and developing the York Rite. The York Rite, ritual, rites, as it were, and in a ceremony called the Knights Templar. And this is an American invention. Now, granted, they incorporate all the elements, symbols, colors, standards of the medieval Knights Templars. The red, the white tunics, the white cape with the red cross of St. George. The only difference, and this is what separates this ceremonial from all others in Freemasonry, is in order to join the Knights Templar, you have to pledge your allegiance to Jesus Christ. If you are if you are Jewish or Buddhist or deist like me, and you're not a Christian, the Knights Templar isn't for you. And that is really the only Masonic ceremonial where you actually have to have a religious confession in order to join it. But in a nutshell, yeah, I'm a 32nd. I became a 32nd. Let's see here. This would have been in 1999. And the 33rd is purely honorary, and you have to be invited to join it. It's usually given to people who are, do a lot of charity work, political people, outstanding members in the community, as it were, is how you earn an invite to join the 33rd.
That is a fascinating aspect to it. It creates another level of mystery. And the thing is I get a lot of emails once in a while that say, hey man, don't pick on the Masons. Everything bad you hear is garbage. My uncle's a Mason. It's just a social club for drinking and yada yada. And they seem so damn convinced. But to play devil's advocate for the other side and ask, isn't it possible that the first 32 degrees are a sort of social club or a community of do-gooders and philanthropists? And then the power-hungry, corrupt elite are at the top, and they only bring up the people that they know would play ball. It's kind of like a giant PR campaign, kind of like what the Vatican does with, your typical Catholics are good people, but then they're raping kids in the back of the church.
But I don't really. My take on it would be a little bit more different than that. Is I wouldn't say so much that it's more of a where the 33rd is you're brought in or anything like that. Where I would say the information is getting lost is, and this is what I wrote the book about, and these doctrines are contained, is that basically what Freemasonry, both in the Blue Lodge and the higher degrees, are trying to relate is this sort of lost wisdom, what you would call the ancient mystery tradition, Gnosticism, the reawakening of a divine spark, and this information. And, the symbolism of the lodge, both the Blue Lodge and the higher degrees, this is what is lost on, what 99.9% of the Masons out there. And there's a reason why. And the reason is because when you join the lodge like I did in 1997, I mean, you're going to go through the rituals. I mean, just forget the high degrees for a minute. Mm-hmm. You're just going to go through the entered apprentice ritual. You're going to go through the fellow craft ritual, and you're going to go through the master mason ritual, and you're just going to come out of it like I did, thinking, oh, so what? I mean, what's the big deal here? What is being lost is, and this is what, only 1 or 2% of your Masons do, and I did it, is you have to sit down and start reading the people like the Manly Palmer Halls of the world, like the Albert Pikes of the world, like the Albert Mackeys of the world, who explain the, what you would want to call the esoteric or even occult symbolism of what you just went through. Because they don't even, most Masons don't even understand this. And, you get into these concepts, going back to Gnostic traditions of what you would call the dying and resurrected sun man, the attempting to awaken the divine spark in the person, concepts of, personal enlightenment. We tie in elements of Pythagoras, what you would call astrology, or what you would be more aptly to call astrotheology. These elements are all there, but unless you sit down, when you come home from work for 5 hours a night, and turn off the TV, and sit there and read, the Albert Pikes, the Manly Palmer Halls of the world, you're not going to understand this material. I put it in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. I've got a whole chapter on it, trying to explain this lost mystery tradition that's going on in the lodge, that most Masons, aren't aware of, and it's just, a fact of, it's just really what you would want to call just a sad fact of reality. I mean, who's got time for this stuff anymore when we all have, 9 to 5 jobs and, a wife and a kid? I mean, who's got time to read this material? But, I mean, that's the material's out there, and I talk about it in the Royal Arch, and that's what was lost in Freemasonry. However, I can tell you that there is a massive esoteric revival going on right now where this knowledge, partly due to things like the internet, the National Treasure material, the Dan Brown material, where this is now becoming, and hopefully my book is becoming much more cognizant on people.
Robert, I have a question. One of the most interesting things I find about Freemasonry is that they incorporate these elements of ritual, of ceremony, and of rites of passage. And for a lot of reasons, I think those are really interesting in maturation and growth and initiating people into more responsibility and more direct contact with, the universe that they are a participant with. And do you feel like that is those three that I mentioned, ritual, ceremony, and rites of passage, are kind of lost in our society? Do you think our society is not very good at providing those for people?
I think that, I guess that's really a personal issue. I think that within the Masonic Lodge, I think they try to do this, but it's like I said, it's just the material, you're definitely right. The concept of, the rite of passage and, the ritual, you are initiated, through 3 degrees in Blue Lodge Masonry, and what these rituals are trying to do to you, or try to awaken in you, is what is best described as sort of your divine spark, your own personal enlightenment, your purpose in the world, and it's you're going through these ritualistic allegories. You're going through rituals that contain a lot of allegories and symbolisms, and these symbolisms and allegories, are kind of lost within the Blue Lodge, just because. You have to sit down and read these books by these Masonic masters, people like Albert Mackey, Albert Pike, Manly Palmer Hall is another one who comes to mind, who go, and I talk about it also in the Royal Arch of Enoch, who explain what these rituals are trying to convey to you, explain the symbolisms of the 3rd degree ritual, that these are this gets into concepts of what you would want to call the dying and resurrected sun man, where, it's igniting your divine spark in you. And until recently, this was kind of lost within the lodge. However, with the advent of the internet in the late 90s, things like Dan Brown, National Treasure movies, and hopefully my book, that this knowledge is now being restored, in the Blue Lodge and in the higher degrees.
Yeah, I think people just sometimes get a little freaked out when they see like a map of Washington, D.C., and when you connect the landmarks, it makes a pentagram or the compass symbol or whatever it seems to be.
Right.
It's a bit creepy, and if a group had so much power as to influence the structuring of the layout of the nation's capital, what else are they orchestrating? I think that's what people start to wonder about.
Well, I mean, I have a whole chapter on the Masonic and occult architecture of the Federal District. That comes straight out of when you get into these concepts of alignment, of these alignments and these symbols. That comes straight out of the world of a character named Hermes Trismegistus. And you have to know your Masonic lore here. Hermes in Freemasonry, it's a real long story. I'm going to really try to condense this as fast as possible. But in the Royal Arch degree, you have to know what's going on in Blue Lodge ritual. I'm going to do my real best to condense this. But in a nutshell, in Blue Lodge Masonry, in the third degree, you have something that is lost. It's called the Tetragrammaton. It's the name of God. And it's through this name that all learning is made possible. In a real brief nutshell, this word is recovered in the Royal Arch of Enoch degree, and it occurs in the secret underground vault. And this vault has already been breached by two characters, one named Hermes Trismegistus and the other named Pythagoras. They pronounce this name correctly, and they restore the literary pillar. Hermes restores the literary pillar, which all liberal arts and sciences come from. Pythagoras correctly pronounces it and restores mathematics. The two pillars were inscribed by Enoch and contain, information that he received from his visitation in the heavens, where he was taken by God in corporeal form and exposed to all this occult forbidden knowledge. He inscribes it on these two pillars, and these two characters, Hermes and Pythagoras, restore the knowledge. Hermes runs around with this thing called the Emerald Tablet, and on it is the Hermetic maxim called as above, so below, which is that if you're going to build buildings of importance, you want to align them to their, astral alignments. It's not negative. It's what he's trying to convey is you're drawing the power of the heavens where God is, where the stars are, down to earth. This is carried forward by two Renaissance masters. The first one is a guy by the name of Raymond Lully, who writes several treatises. He's a Christian mystic and says that basically the same sort of thing, that buildings of importance should be these astrological, occult memory temples that are trying to preserve this astral wisdom. And another person who kind of talks about this is a Dominican friar named Giordano Bruno, who talks about the buildings of import are memory temples, trying to preserve this lost sacred wisdom. But yeah, I mean, you get into the Federal District, I mean, you have so much going on there. You have the whole thing with the broken pentagram over the White House, then you've got the obelisk, which is the Capitol, and then you've got it's the Washington Monument, and then you've got the dome on the Capitol. The dome, the obelisk, and the pentagram form the hieroglyph for the Egyptian dog star Sirius, who is, of course, in the Egyptian mysteries, Isis. This ties into Blue Lodge Freemasonry, where when we were talking that this character Hieroglyph is building this Solomon's temple, and he possesses this lost word, or the secret word, which is the name of God. He's killed. The word is lost. And when Hieroglyph's body's resurrected, the person has to form what's called the 5 points of fellowship. The 5 points are, of course, a pentagram that is a reference to the Egyptian dog star Sirius, or Isis. Well, why is that? Well, if you know your Egyptian mythology, Isis was a virgin goddess who also possessed the secret name of God, the secret name of Amun-Re-Ra, which she used to resurrect Osiris, her solar brother husband, so she could produce Horus. And of course, this gets into concepts of Blue Lodge Masonry, where the candidate is resurrected as Osiris, as Hieroglyph, and the 5 points are an esoteric reference to this Egyptian dog star Sirius. You also have, in the Federal District, you have the White House forming the Pythagorean right triangle, which is formed from the White House, or the Executive Mansion, which was the White House is a duplication of a Masonic lodge in Dublin, Ireland. The Masonic architect behind the White House was a man named James Hogan. He's a Freemason. The Washington Monument obelisk was a product of another Freemason named Robert Mills. And then, of course, the United States Capitol building was a product of another Freemason named Benjamin Henry Latrobe. These form, if you go from the White House down to the monument, then up the mall to the Capitol building, and then down Pennsylvania Avenue, you, of course, have a Pythagorean right triangle. Well, a Pythagorean right triangle is also known as the 47th proposition of Euclid, and this is the symbol of Masonic rulership. I mean, the worshipful master who sits in the east as the rising sun wears a Pythagorean right triangle around his neck. When you get into the concept of a Pythagorean right triangle, you will also know that there is esoteric symbology going on with this. The one side, in the ancient mysteries of a Pythagorean right triangle, the one side is Osiris, the other side is Osiris, and then of course the hypotenuse, which is formed between the two, is their solar divine child known as Horus. Well, in the federal district, the hypotenuse is of course Pennsylvania Avenue. Well, Pennsylvania Avenue is of course named after the state of Pennsylvania. And what's Pennsylvania? What's the keystone state? I mean, what's a keystone? Well, a keystone creates a royal arch. And, without a keystone, a royal archway can't stand. And there is an entire cult history in the Royal Arch of Enoch book as to why Pennsylvania is known as the keystone. And that comes straight out of occult Royal Arch Freemasonry.
I really was liking, you were talking about these mythologies of Sirius and Osiris and Horus, and how not only the stories, and the stories really represent solar deities here, we're talking about the sun and the moon, but how the stories as well as these symbols have been the exact same symbols since at least Egypt. And so the Egyptian mystery schools really, it's just changed a lot over time, but we're still using the same symbols. Do you find it interesting that we're still trying to understand these symbols that have been around for so long in human history?
Yeah, I think I know where I know where you're going with this question, and the best way for me, and I agree with you. You get into these. I mean, it depends on who you want to talk to. I mean, they're definitely there in the Egyptian mystery schools. You will find this also in Druidism. You will find them in the mysteries of Mithras. You will find them in what's the other one? The mysteries of Eleusis, which was the Greco-Roman sort of mystery school. Where it's the whole thing of the dying and resurrected sun god. This is in Blue Lodge Masonry, where the candidate is symbolically killed and brought back to life. This to me is almost what you would call a product of what what like Carl Jung would call the collective unconscious. Where it's just part of our being. It's just embedded in us as a whole. The whole thing with the sun being the light of the world. Your lunar symbology, which of course incorporates all over the place as your sacred feminine. And the 12 houses of the zodiac, which serve as these sort of Jungian archetypes, in society. I think that's the reason that it's still with us. It's just part of our human nature, and it's just part of what, Jung best described as the collective unconscious of mankind, that whether we like it or not, it's there, and, we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over, whether we know it or not, basically.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, even the Pennsylvania Avenue thing I thought was pretty fascinating. And, to have such detail built into the structure and naming of the nation's capital, you have to think that their influence was just as powerful in other areas, politically.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when the country is founded, I mean, and this is what I'm going to say here. I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction, but what I'm about to say is probably well known. I mean, obviously, a lot of the founders of this country, people like Washington, Franklin, people like that are obviously Masons. And what they're doing is they are using Freemasonry as a template to create this new nation. And I'll give you another example for this. You talked about like I'll just go into this real quick, and I'll go back to my original thought. You were just saying about the symbolism in Washington, D.C. You will see I mean, I'm here in Baltimore, Maryland right now, and you will see this exact same symbolism in Baltimore, in the heart of downtown Baltimore, where in Washington, D.C., you have the domed building, which is the United States Capitol, looking over, overshadowing the Washington Monument, which is, the obelisk. You have this completely parodied in Baltimore, Maryland, where you have the dome building, which is the Baltimore Basilica, which was the first basilica in the United States, overlooking the first monument to George Washington in the heart of downtown Baltimore. Well, who did the Baltimore Basilica? Well, it's Benjamin Henry Latrobe. It's the same guy who did the United States Capitol building in D.C. Who did the Baltimore Washington Monument? Well, it's Robert Mills. I mean, it's the same exact guy who did the obelisk in the Nation's Mall. I mean, so you'll see this, parodied and, copied all over the place. With regard to Masonry's influence in the development of the country, I totally agree with you. The people who are developing this country are definitely turning towards, Freemasonry and its tools, and they're using them as nation-building devices. For example, we'll put the architecture aside for a minute, but like with after the Revolution was over and they're developing the United States Constitution, what do you have? You have the triple division of government, between an executive, which is, of course, the president, a legislative, which is, of course, the House and Senate, and a judiciary, which is, of course, the Supreme Court. Well, where are they getting this triple division of government from? That comes straight out of Blue Lodge Freemasonry, where the lodge the governance is divided, thrice. You have the worshipful master who's, sits in the east as the rising sun. And of course, he is assisted by two other persons, the junior and senior wardens, who sit in the south and west. And they represent those three, chairs, the worshipful master and the two wardens, are the three phases of the sun: the rising sun, the sun at midday, and of course the setting sun. So the entire triple division of government within the United States is based on the triple division of government, in a Masonic Blue Lodge, which is basically a solar allegory. So right then and there, you will see Masonic, influence on the nation, on the development of the nation. The guy who is really carrying it forward after, you kind of get out of the phase with the founding fathers, the guy who's really carrying it forward at that point is this guy I mentioned earlier in your program, this governor in New York named DeWitt Clinton, who is basically the guy behind the York Rite of Freemasonry and the Knights Templar, the Knights Templar ceremonial and, encampments in the United States of America. He's the guy who's really, impressing Freemasonry as a tool for men to come together who have political differences across state lines, and using Freemasonry as a device to settle political differences as a way to sort of ameliorate the new country, as it were.
Huh. Yeah, the influence just seems incredibly detailed. That's what's so funny about it. And, that kind of power, it seems like they'd have to have some type of goals for the country. We'd have to be going towards the direction that they're trying to turn things. I don't know if it's been infiltrated since, but to bring up something else, which is kind of a strike against Masonry, is these rumors of Satanism. And this kind of goes back to the Enoch story, because I've had guests on the show talk about Enoch as the snake in the Garden of Eden, as a representation of Enoch and him giving knowledge to humans that God supposedly doesn't want us to have. And is this kind of why you think there's these misconceptions about Masonry, that it's Satanism at a higher level, because there's a worship, or not a worship, but an adoration of this character who actually was trying to get knowledge that God wanted destroyed and give it to people?
It ties into anti-Masonry. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's Satanism, but it's definitely anti-Masonry, and here's why. It's because, you have this character of Enoch coming out of the book of Genesis. He's one of two people in the Bible to never die a physical death. The prophet Elijah is the other. But Enoch is taken up into heaven, and this is just sort of like a personal, twist on the thing. It's kind of up to the individual person to make up their own mind on this. But at any rate, he's taken up to heaven, the human form, and what the book of Enoch documents is what he sees up there. He meets the archangels, and he interacts with this group of fallen angels named the Watchers, and it's through his interaction of both these two groups, these archangels and this other group called the Watchers. And you know, I'm sure you know, the Watchers are these fallen, you know, angels that have fallen out of God's grace because they've come down to earth and had sex with the human women to create this sort of race of giants called the Nephilim. And this has displeased God. But it's through these interactions that Enoch gleans this you know, occult esoteric knowledge that he ultimately brings back to earth. And this is the crux of anti-Masonry. I wouldn't go so far as, you know, call it, it's anti-Masonry. It's not devil worship or anything. But what happens is Enoch, when he comes back down to earth with this knowledge, and let me just say this real quick, that it's two ways of looking at it. I mean, I don't deny this in any way, shape, or form. That within the Bible, within the Old Testament, I mean, the knowledge is definitely considered forbidden and, you know, what you would kind of call unholy. You know, I mean, I don't, you know, I wouldn't go so far as to call it evil, but it's sort of discouraged. But where it comes into Masonry and where you get this real, you know, hardcore element of Masonry is, and this is coming out of the, you know, ancient, you know, Gothic constitutions of Freemasonry, and you'll find these stories in Masonic monitors by people like, you know, William Preston, Thomas Smith Webb, these Masonic ritualists. Is the story is that, and this is kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier, is that when Enoch comes back to heaven, or excuse me, comes back to earth from heaven, he has this, you know, occult, you know, quote unquote demonic knowledge that he's learned from the afterlife. Well, what happens is he catches wind that the flood of Noah is coming. Enoch is either the great-grandfather or the great-grandfather of Noah. It's one of the two. It escapes me right now. But at any rate, he catches wind that this flood of Noah is coming and that God is intending to eradicate mankind and, you know, and start over, basically. But what Enoch does is he tricks God. He thwarts him. He says, no. He says, I'm going to pull one over on you, Demiurge. And what he does is he builds this secret underground vault what he does is he builds this secret underground vault under 9 archways, and what he does is he takes 2 pillars and he inscribes all the mathematical secrets he learned in the heavens from his interactions on one pillar. He inscribes the, you know, art of reading and writing, which one would call the 7 liberal arts and sciences, on the other pillar, and he buries them alongside the secret name of God in the secret underground vault to, you know, thwart the loss of this knowledge. And of course, Masonry in Masonic ritual and in its ceremonies and its philosophies, you know, has it where this knowledge is restored to mankind. And this is coming straight out of this Royal Arch of Enoch degree, this higher degree, where this wisdom is restored by these 2 characters, Hermes Trismegistus and Pythagoras. And that's really the heart and crux of anti-Masonry in this country. Now, if you want to take it in another direction, you get into concepts of Lucifer. And I don't shy away from this, you know, where you have Albert Pike and, you know, talking about, is it Lucifer that bears the light, doubt it not? That comes straight out of the Morals and Dogma book. And then I talk about it in the Royal Arch book. And then, of course, the other Mason who talks about it is someone I was talking about earlier, a man by the name of Manly Palmer Hall. He writes a book called The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. And in it, and I'm paraphrasing here, I know that, he writes a line something to the effect of, he says something, when a man becomes a Mason, a 3rd-degree Mason, he said he's now the warrior, and now the seething energies of Lucifer are at his disposal. And believe you me, I cannot tell you how many YouTube videos I have watched, you know, with people talking about these 2 passages over and over again. What I really think they're trying to talk about here is, and this gets sort of into your ancient mystery tradition again, is the concept of Lucifer is the planet Venus. You know, which rises before the sunrise in most, you know, in the northern hemisphere on most mornings. And the reason that Venus associates with Lucifer is its false light. It's not the real light. The real light of the world is, of course, the sun, but it heralds the coming true light. And that is exactly what Albert Pike is talking about. He says, is it Lucifer that bears the light? Doubt it not. And he's right. Is it Venus that's announcing the true light, or the sun? And what you have here is sort of this play on words where Lucifer is announcing, or Venus is announcing the, you know, coming of the true light, which is the sun, which is, of course, enlightenment, you know, esoteric wisdom, you know, concepts of self-awakening, divine spark, things of that nature. So I don't really see it as anything negative. But I mean, I could see where someone would, though.
I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell and what he talks about mythology being a way for humanity to kind of project on kind of like a scale that's easy for the imagination to envision, but what we're really talking about is aspects of the human condition. And you said with Hermes' maxim of as above, so below, I think with symbolism and with mythology, and when we talk about Hermes and Sirius and what these characters did, it's also an element of like as without, so within. As we learn about these stories, we also learn about ourselves. I don't know. I guess just the power of these symbols is taken for granted, and how do we come to terms
let me
with
answer your question this way. I think I understand what you're talking about. I mean, and this again gets back to kind of like the collective unconscious with Carl Jung is, we have these stories being told, and I agree with you with Joseph Campbell, and if you just want to like, if we just kind of want to move into sort of, with the mythology, with the lunar symbology, with the solar symbology, with the Egyptian symbology, with the mythology in general, whether it be, European, Teutonic, Greco-Roman, Middle Eastern, Persian, even Chinese, or Native American, and this being handed down. I'm going to kind of bring it into modern form right now is, if you want to look at some of this material, look at some of the most popular movies right now, where you'll see this exact same, sort of imagery that, we've talked about, during the course of this program where, in the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch book documents some Masonic, and Enochian symbolism in movies. And I'm actually finished my second book, which is called Cinema Symbolism, where I go forward and I talk about more mythology, and these, mythological, what's the word I'm looking for? Monomyths. That's the word Campbell used in films. I mean, like, for example, let's just take, like the first Star Wars movie. This would have been episode 4. Where you have Luke Skywalker battling, the Sith Lord. Well, the name Luke Skywalker is the sun. I mean, the word Luke comes from the word lux, which is Latin for light, and then, what light skywalks? I mean, it's the sun. Who's the enemy? Who's the enemy of the sun in the Egyptian mysteries? I mean, it's Set. This is why the Dark Lords are, the Sith Lords, or the Seth Lords. That comes straight out of mythology. The sun has a lunar sister. Apollo has Diana. Well, who's Luke's lunar sister? Well, it's Leia, who is always dressed in the white robes of the moon. You will see that, carried forward in Star Wars. This is the Campbell monomyth. If you really want to see something interesting, and I know it's not the best of the Star Wars movies, I'll be the first to admit that, but you have something, Lucas did something really interesting in the first one, and in the first trilogy. This would have been episodes 1, 2, and 3, where you had the first one come out in 1999. This was the movie called The Phantom Menace. And I know it's not the greatest of the Star Wars movie, but just bear with me here with a minute. If you recall, if you've seen this movie, we are introduced to the Anakin Skywalker. This is Luke's father, and he's the little boy running around. Mm-hmm. And the Jedi Master is Liam Neeson. And Liam Neeson meets with Luke's mother, who is played by an actress named Pernilla August. And Liam Neeson, I think the character's name was Qui-Gon Jinn. He's this Jedi Master. He's fascinated with the little boy, and he says, who was his father? And the mother says, well, there was no father. Basically implying he was virgin birth. Well, Pernilla August, and this movie came out in 1999. Pernilla August, that same year in 1999, starred in a made-for-TV movie called Mary, the Mother of Jesus, where she played the Virgin Mary. And Jesus in that movie was played by Christian Bale, who went on to play the Batman in the Dark Knight movies. But you will clearly see this parallel with, this virgin birth of Anakin, by the Virgin Mother, which is, of course, Shmi Skywalker. And the parallels with Anakin Skywalker and Jesus Christ are, of course, astounding. Now, Jesus, of course, never becomes this Dark Lord, but, of course, Anakin Skywalker, in episodes 2 and 3, is rejected by the temple elders. He ultimately storms a temple. He wants to use magical powers to keep people from dying. You know, he's dead and resurrected. You know, he's dead on the one planet, yet is born again as Darth Vader. So, I mean, you know, here it is again, this massive, you know, religious monomyth in front of our faces, but do we have the eyes to see it?
Well, it's strange because you can go through so many different movies and see these same themes, these same symbols. And I just wonder who's making these movies. You know, that you have to, sometimes it seems like you'd have to have a really deep understanding of this hidden knowledge, this Gnostic wisdom, to come up with this, to put it out there so blatantly in the films.
Oh, absolutely. And I in the second book I'm writing, I do believe these filmmakers are very cognizant of a lot of this material. You know, we've mentioned this person, we've mentioned him a couple times during the course of this program, named Manly Palmer Hall. Manly Palmer Hall was this Canadian mystic. He's a Freemason, and he established, you can Google this, I mean, this is not anything secret I'm about to say. He established this society called the Philosophical Research Society, which was the collection of these books containing this lost Gnostic occult wisdom. And PRS, you know, Philosophical Research Society, is set up in the heart of Los Angeles, not too far away from Hollywood. And I have little doubt in my mind that a lot of movie makers are not using the material in this library to produce, to produce some of the icons and symbols and storylines that you will see on the screen. I mean, again, I'm just going to rattle off two more for you. We just talked about, some of the parallels with Jesus, with, Anakin Skywalker. Or, I mean, again, here we got Neo in the Matrix, who is this chosen one, meant to deliver mankind from the darkness. What happens to Neo? I mean, he's killed, he's resurrected, and how does the movie end? He ascends into the heavens.
They also call the creator of the Matrix the architect.
Right, and the architect. Right, there you go, the architect, the demiurge. The sort of false creator god, as it were. And you will see in what's the other one? The end of the ones that are airing now. The Harry Potter. Harry Potter's dead and resurrected and fights the Dark Lord. I mean, it's the same. It's the same. The Truman Show is another one with Jim Carrey, where you have the Ed Harris character who's Christoph, who's the evil creator. Of course, the Jim Carrey character is Truman Burbank. I mean, of course, Burbank is a reference to a movie studio. But of course, Truman's first name, and he's trying to figure out his meaning in life. What his purpose is, that something's not right with his life. The name Truman is the true man. I mean, it's
Wow.
His name is spelled Truman, but he's the true man, Trueman. So you have that entire Gnostic theme going on in that movie. I mean, how does the movie end? He goes out in the boat, to find out who he really is. That the concept of going out into a boat by yourself to discover who you are comes straight out of the Druidic mysteries. And how does the movie end? He ascends the staircase into heaven, as Jesus, and goodbye, see you later. I mean, it's the same theme over and over again.
Huh.
Another question I have about Jim Carrey specifically is he is in a lot of movies that have to do with, he's in Bruce Almighty that has to do with talking with God. He's in The Truman Show, which has to do with finding out yourself, existentialism, and he's the Green Man. He's a resonator of the Green Man in other movies. And you mentioned Christian Bale being involved with the Dark Knight, which were very, very culturally important movies, and the themes they talked about at the time was really important as well. His first movie he was ever in as a child was called Empire of the Sun. He's American Psycho in a different movie. I don't know. I just feel like their careers are kind of steered to say things like Christian Bale is the sun resonator, but he's also the dark aspects of the sun. You can look at the three trilogies of the Batman being the first one, Batman Begins, basically meaning nighttime begins. The second one is The Dark Knight, meaning the whole passage, and then the third one being The Dark Knight Rises, kind of like now it's sunlight again, now it's the end of that cycle.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you'll see this again, the Batman character, the Christian Bale character symbolically dies but is alive for real. You see Alfred sees him across the table, and of course he's now with the Catwoman character, which is the sacred feminine in all this. But the one that's the real kicker in all this is in the final I mean, and this is really the kicker, and if you go back and watch it, is in the final Matrix movie, I believe it was called Matrix Revolutions. The second one was Reloaded. Let me just say this. I mean, we don't have time to talk about it. The first Matrix movie is overloaded with Gnostic and Masonic, and I mean, we could do a whole show on the first Matrix movie alone. But at the end of the third Matrix movie, is the most astounding thing I've ever seen. Is when everything's corrected and the Matrix has rebooted itself and the architect has agreed, to kind of let people out of their little cages and, live their lives. The little girl comes up to the woman who was the oracle, and but you'll see in the distance the sunrise, and the little girl says, "Oh, look, it's Neo. It's there he is. He's the sun. He's the resurrected Sun Man."
True.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible, and I agree with you. The thing with the Dark Knight. I mean, you've got a lot of you've got a lot of Jungian psychology going on within the Batman mythos alone. I mean, I agree with you with the whole thing with the Empire of the Sun, and then of course, the Dark Knight rises, the sunrise. But with like the Batman character, you have this concept of, he's sort of, if you go back to the one that was made with Nicholson, where Nicholson played the Joker, and it came out in 1989, where Michael Keaton was Batman. There's a line in there, I can't remember the character who says it, he says, he's like a vampire. He's like, that this Batman's a vampire. I mean, that is absolutely right. You've got this weakling Bruce Wayne who's running around in the daylight, weak, can't do anything, but as soon as the sun goes down, well, boom, here comes, the evil bat, the vampire who has all his powers, has all his gadgets, and this is clearly coming out of the world of Carl Gustav Jung, the shadow self taking over at night. I mean, this is Jekyll and Hyde at its purest notion.
I don't know how deep it goes, but Christian Bale might be even Baal. You can think of it in terms of, I don't know, it kind of sounds like that to me. And Christian, itself is an interesting first name for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I love the movie stuff. I think it's really fascinating. But it just, again, it's like, did the Masons just stop making buildings and start making movies?
Well, I like I said, I'm writing this. I'm writing this. Well, I'm not writing it. I finished it. It's my second book, and I get into all the movie symbolism. And I believe I kind of put forward in the book that, yeah, there are some movie makers who are aware of this occult esoteric wisdom. Some of it could also be a product of what's called the collective unconscious, which is the works of Carl Gustav Jung.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me either. And it's probably a little more of a rational explanation for it. But I mean, the symbolism, the iconography, some of the character development, there's some of their names. I mean, I agree with you guys. It's really not it's not a coincidence, in my opinion.
Man. All right, man. Well, hey, it's about that time. It's been a great talk with you. Very honest. I do really appreciate it. I mean, is there anything you want to leave the people with? Maybe your website or where they can get your current book and next book?
Yeah. Do you mind if I give my promotional material?
Go for it.
Okay, you can find me at the best way to buy the Royal Arch of Enoch book, or if you're interested in me and you just want to learn more about me, my website is www.robertwsullivaniv.com, and that's the letters IV because my name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. And again, that's www.robertwsullivaniv.com. You can go there. There's links to buy the Royal Arch of Enoch book. The movie book will be out in a couple months. There are links there to follow me on social media. You can go watch YouTube videos that I've made. This is all free. You can follow me on Twitter. There are links to like the Royal Arch of Enoch book, or, to become a fan on Facebook. You can like the Cinema Symbolism book on Facebook. These pages are all routinely updated. I have a media section. You can listen to other radio interviews I've done. And I please invite anyone to check it out. And again, www.robertwsullivan with 2 L's, IV.com.
Good deal, Rob. It has been great talking to you once again. Hopefully we can do some more movie stuff when that book comes out.
Oh, I'd love to, guys, and I appreciate you having me on the Higher Side Chats. It was wonderful to be here with both of you today.
Awesome, man. Well, take care, and thanks again. Enjoy the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Wow, man. There we go. The Royal Arch of Enoch. What'd you think?
I thought it was a great episode. I mean, some of the stuff was skimmed over really quick, considering the at-length depth, all of these individual topics. You could give a lot of attention and learn a lot if you delved a lot of time into a lot of the stuff he said in like, just really passing references, but the mythology stuff and the mysticism is stuff I've been really fascinated by myself, and so I've done so much already reading into it that I was already revved up for this one.
Yeah, man, it's like, it's starting to seem more to me like Masonry is just a modern-day Egyptian mystery school. They have this Gnostic wisdom, they drink some beers, but I don't know how deep they are involved in the shadow government conspiracy at this point. I don't know how many members of the elites are Freemasons. It's weird. We'll never really know, but I don't know how they really show their influence in terms of global events. That's kind of my concern. And I guess this wisdom is kind of like, to bring it back to Star Wars, it's like the Force. You have the wisdom. You can either be Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker. You can use it either way you want. And I wonder if the Masons have really any serious philosophy about using it for good or evil. And it's weird because at that high level, you have to be brought up. He said he's been a 32nd degree for how many years? 10 years? Over 10 years? Like 99, I think he said.
9, I think is what he said.
So he's waiting. He's waiting for the call.
Same year, I'm pretty sure that the original Matrix came out that year.
Yes. And in the Matrix, Neo's passport expires on September 11th, 2001. It's crazy shit. And I don't know. It's just weird because you don't know where their influence ends and where another group's begins.
I really like the line, did they just stop building buildings and started making movies? Because once you get into symbolism and encoding symbolism in popular media, and by doing so, really, you're talking about some heavy topics, but it is astrotheology. Santos and these guys are right. It is astrotheology is what they're encoding into movies that become the biggest, most popular, biggest production movies.
Yeah, I've been getting criticism lately, a couple of emails that have said, hey man, you have strayed from conspiracy and you're now doing all this New Age shit, which is so off-putting to me because I hate New Age shit. You'll never hear me say love and light with a serious tone. And I feel like that's just the direction of the conspiracy movement, really. It's these same guests, these same people who 10 years ago were talking about the New World Order are now talking about the symbology and what it means and how to take it to a personal level and self-enlightenment, self-empowerment. And I don't know if that's because that's just a natural progression or because they're giving up on any type of actual real fight or winning this war. So instead they're just like, do the best you can while inside your cage.
Well, I like that these people have listened to so many episodes that they notice the trend that it shifted, and for that I commend them for being great listeners of the show. But really, it's one run. That's part of the aspect of the show, is that there's different tiers of this thing, this mystery that's going on, that is life. And one of the tiers is, there's some conspiracy shit going on where these groups meet, they're doing illegal things, they're chopping up bodies in order to make money, sending drone missiles to blow people up for money. Terrible stuff's going on, on the surface and also secretly. And that's in a lot of ways that's disempowering to the individual. And then so on different levels you get more into, well, what is going on with the individual? And then you get to, I'm kind of in this human condition just like everybody else is, and I've got to learn how to become my own Luke Skywalker, my own Neo. I've got to become a champion of my own self and not worry so much about this or that group that's doing terrible shit, which will always happen. I need to be worried about, how do I become the sun? How do I become this dominant force of truth that's just rising and becoming more powerful? That's the real mystery, is how do you awaken that kind of force in yourself, or recognize that it's there for you to access, rather than worrying so much about this or that false flag event that may or may not happen.
Yeah, I mean, if it doesn't, I completely agree. Every shooting in the past 2 years is some type of false flag, and then there's so many threads about why, and is it a gun control issue? And it is. I do think it's super important to try to predict the narrative that is coming down the pike. I mean, I love to do that. It's almost like a riddle, unfolding a riddle. And if you can get ahead of it, and I don't want to say predict, because you're not really predicting anything, but extrapolate the pattern and kind of see where it's going before it gets there. I mean, that to me is the ultimate proof of the conspiracy. For someone to come out and say, hey, man, the cycle's coming around again, and it's this date, and we expect to see a shooting on right around this time, and then one happens, I mean, you've identified the problem. You've identified the narrative.
Yeah, and just by noticing the patterns of what they have been doing, the way they lay it out, there is an as above, so below symbolism to it when they do things, even in the news, even in the way Sandy Hook or anything like that plays out. There's so many ritualized elements that are trying to imply much bigger things about how dangerous strangers are and how we're all psychopaths and we're all need to be on medication, otherwise we're just going to just terrorize everybody. And there's all these subtle themes that they play on and they encode into politics just the same way that they encode solar symbolism into movies.
It's funny you mentioned the psychopath thing, because just last week Teresa lost her wallet. My girlfriend lost her wallet. She put it on top of her car. It blew off the car. About a week later, some guy calls up, or actually no, the weed doctor calls up and says, hey, somebody called and they found our card in your wallet and they have your wallet. You can go get it here. And I guess the guy still had it or whatever. He was trying to get in touch with her. So she went to his house to get this wallet, and several friends were like, hey, you can't just go to some guy's house. This guy's going to rape you and kill you and blah, blah, blah. And I was at work, or I'd go too, but she was like, no, he's not. Of all the possible people he called in my wallet, he called the weed doctor. I'm pretty sure he's going to be okay. My address is on a fucking card, and my address is on the license. He would just come in the middle of the night and rape me if he wanted to do that. People are so paranoid that even an ultimate do-gooder is speculated on as being probably a rapist.
And this has to, in the personal context, what this really has to do with is you are tensing up like you're about to be hit. You're so afraid of the unknown, of meeting a stranger, of being involved in some new situation. You're so goddamn afraid of the fact that reality actually just changes all the time and constantly puts you in situations you feel like you're not ready for. And so in response, you just kind of like fear everybody, and you say, I have this in-group and these people are cool, but everybody else is just a terror and I can't be around them. And I just feel like people like that are so tense and boxed up, and they don't feel good. They don't physically feel good. It's where it starts, is in the body. They don't feel good, and they just cannot relax. And part of like what Alan Watts says about nature and really relaxing and accepting human nature and accepting unpredictability is that occasionally, sometimes you do get burned. Like sometimes there's terrible fucking rains and winds and natural occurrences, like the whole wilderness, the mystery. Sometimes it's really rough. But that's part of, like, you still got to handle that.
Yeah.
And no amount of, like, clenching up or protecting yourself from the unknown actually prevents the unknown from unfolding for you. So, like, you're inevitably going to run into it. You might as well relax rather than being tense all the time.
Right. And I do identify this show as primarily a conspiracy show. I mean, the show's called the HighersideChats. The real connection is that these are topics that are for an open mind, for sitting down, smoking a joint, and really exploring. I mean, that's really the crux. That's kind of what brings everything together, even some things that seem unrelated. To me, they're still enjoyable to explore. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, you know. We know that fear is being injected. There's trauma-based control. We're economic slaves. How can you talk about that and then not talk about self-empowerment? You have to talk about a remedy for the problems, not just the problems. And I think that's where Alex Jones is controlled opposition. Alex Jones it's just another side of the same fear coin. You know, for those people who have woken up enough to realize it's going on, here's another brand of fear. You know, Alex Jones is really just it's coded as exposure, but it's really just another brand of fear. And that's why I think he's kind of illegitimate. So I think that to have a real honest show, you've got to talk about both sides. And yes, maybe we have strayed a little bit more into the self-empowerment shows, and I think that the majority of people like them. I've been getting majority good emails, but you always remember the bad ones and the ones you did that were negative.
Oh, they stick out. They're like 10 times more powerful.
Yeah, so sometimes I second guess, but I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and doing shows that I think are interesting, and I think most people are going to come along with me. And I try to make the titles descriptive enough that if there's a subject you don't like, just skip that shit. But all in all, you got to talk about both sides.
That's it, man. It's the whole path. It's not just the